Sanding's definitely the most laborious part of my job. It takes up the most amount of time. Even though some days it's probably the worst part of my job, it's also the most transformative, and it definitely takes an object that otherwise you wouldn't recognise as a high-end art object. It transforms it into this beautiful, refined thing. My name is Olive Gilhilly and I'm an artist and designer based in Perth, Western Australia, and I work predominantly in timber. I work in an industrial suburb just outside of Fremantle called O'Connor, and I'm based in an industrial factory that I share with cabinet makers. I grew up surrounded by art. My parents were both artists. It was just part of daily life, making things, creating stuff, painting, drawing, sculpting. And I feel like that really has just always been a really big part of who I am. My dad was a painter. Although I love painting, it's never really been my calling. When I want to express myself, it's always been with modelling, carving or sculpting in some way. I'm more drawn to touch and texture of three-dimensional form. I had my debut solo show in 2021 and it was titled Trunk. As I was making that work, my dad passed away and I had originally moved back to Perth because he had a terminal illness. It was a really big part of the body of work I first created. I was working through the grief of losing my dad. Timber is a sort of material that goes through life cycles as well and like life phases. Lots of my inspiration comes from living in Perth. There's a lot of shapes and forms and certain elements in my pieces that directly reference the coastal landscape here. I feel like the work is grounded in place. I'm very attached to where I come from. Henry Moore, Hands Up, Isamu Noguchi, they're huge influences to me. The shapes that they were using, like often they'd be doing quite what I consider to be feminine shapes in a voyeuristic way. For me, creating these sort of female shapes, it feels like a form of self-portraiture. There's a lot of themes on the human form, bodies supporting bodies, cycles of a relationship. Most of my pieces are from ethically sourced Australian hardwoods like Jarrah or Chewett or Karri. The native Australian timbers are very temperamental. Over the years of working with them, I've had to learn a lot. They are almost alive after they've been chopped down. They've got a lot of movement. They're quite a brittle, hard timber and often like quite high in gum content as well. Sourcing the timber relies on a lot of help from my partner and from friends as well. We have to go into bush, usually four-wheel driving, with chainsaws and use high ab on the back of a ute to crane pieces of wood onto the back and then bush bash it out. The days we do that, it's exciting. While I'm in the bush, there's a Goldilocks timber I'm looking for. It'll be something that maybe hasn't just fallen, something super green, but it also hasn't turned into habitat or hasn't rotten or been eaten by white ants. Not decayed, but not so fresh that it'll spring out when I carve into it. When I'm making works, I have an idea straight away in my head of a piece that I really want to create. In that instance, I'll go and source timber to allow for that design. Other times, it'll be about finding a piece of timber that speaks to me. I'll follow the grain as I'm carving. If there's big knots or there's a twist in the timber, often that'll be a part of the work. It's almost like a collaborative process between me and these natural objects. The way I intuitively carve and the way that I decide what I do with each individual piece of timber, I think that that's a huge part of my practice. This ebonizing solution that I use, it's a concoction of white vinegar and iron oxides, steel wool, rusty nails. It's more of a chemical reaction, so it's the timber reacting to this natural solution. Because the grain is such an important part of it, I don't feel like it's just a commercial stain painting over this beautiful grain. I get a lot of pride when I see a piece totally finished, and certainly the larger pieces, because I do so much of it by myself. There are times where I look at a work and I'm like, I can't believe I made that. Working with these big bits of timber and working with these big bits of equipment is definitely an empowering thing for me. This next exhibition, which is my second solo show, it's going to be titled Asymptote, which is a mathematical term. It's a straight line that approaches a curve infinitely and never really touches. It's basically like a touch that doesn't happen. The whole premise of the exhibition is kind of that moment between two people right before they decide to touch, maybe for the first time. It's almost talking about anticipation as well. Making art can feel a little self-indulgent, and I certainly aim to make works that speak to people. I want to touch on greater themes. When I'm making the work, I hope people want to touch it. I hope people want to have it in their homes, because that's a really important part of my practice. The audience is an essential part of the work.